Thank you for being with us today. My guest is Wendy Abel, and I'm so glad to have her here with us in person so that we can have a real conversation instead of a Zoom call. Wendy is the Vice President of Grants Ministry at Texas Methodist Foundation. And one of the reasons I'm so glad to have Wendy here is we kind of go way back. We worked at the Salvation Army together 12 years ago, and I'm so glad that we have been able to stay in touch, mainly through Facebook, but that's okay. You know, it's helped us keep a friendship going and to be able to watch her wonderful, darling nephew, Miles, grow up. Oh my gosh, I can't believe he's like 14.
14.
Anyway, so putting that aside, I just wanted to lay a little bit of groundwork here for this conversation that we're going to have with Wendy. I'm also just really proud to be able to have watched her career grow, because back when we were at the Salvation Army, she was working in grants. I don't remember your title, but
It's grant writer.
Okay, so you were a grant writer at the Salvation Army, and to have gone to some major organizations in Dallas. I know City Square was one of them. You also have your own business. You're an entrepreneur, which I think you've been doing that all along.
Yeah.
And we can talk about that some too. And now to have this position, very prominent position with the Texas Methodist Foundation. So thank you for being with me today. This is great.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So one of the things that I read about you that you really love about your job, being able to award grants. You've been on both sides of the table, which I think makes a huge difference for someone who is in the position you are now. I want you to talk about that just a little bit to get us started, what it's like to be on the awarding side as opposed to the receiving side.
Yeah, it's been an interesting kind of like circle of life, circle of career, because I've done just about everything that you can do in nonprofit work, from case management to program management and development, and then fundraising and measurements. And I've done everything except be the maintenance person. And normally, because they frown upon using butter knives for screwdrivers, doesn't help with the HVAC. But going from a grant writer or a fundraiser to a grant maker has been an interesting opportunity. And it mostly has to do with a mindset of coming from a place of perceived lack to going to a place of perceived abundance. And that has been different. That was something that I had to and continue to get used to. As a grant writer and a fundraiser, it's easy to see things from a point of need. We're working with persons who we are perceiving need what it is that we have. We're working with persons who we are perceiving have lack. Whereas in grant making, I look for now organizations who see themselves as having an abundance of gifts to be able to give, that they're working with people who are able to give to them, right? I remember you mentioned that I used to work at City Square, and I worked at City Square when Larry James was the CEO, and he used to always talk about the wealth of the poor and how there are persons who live in poverty who are rich in so many different things other than money. And there's some people who have so much money and are just poor in a lot of things. And so I've kind of taken that with me and try to help organizations see their wealth and that the people that they work with are in wealth. So I've kind of taken what I'm able to do at Texas Methodist Foundation and kind of made it different. I have written grants and filled out applications for years and looked at those things that really didn't help tell the story of the work that's being done by organizations, and how can I better help showcase that work. And so that's what's been really an opportunity to be able to step in. And it also gives me a different perspective, because I come at grant making from having done case management and program design and outcomes and measurements and fundraising. So I come at it from a different point of view where I can see things a little bit differently, I think, than other grant makers.
So you made me curious. So when you started your position, which you've had...
It'll be 3 years in September, yeah.
Okay, so 3 years ago when you got there with maybe not these fully fleshed out ideas, but seeing what the opportunity was in the position that you have, what did your boss have to say about that? Or what did your board have to say about that?
And so it was one of the things that I asked during the interview process with Texas Methodist Foundation. And I think one of the things was measurements and how we can measure, which was something that Texas Methodist Foundation was not necessarily doing. We didn't really have measurements to be able to see what that is in the work that we are investing and what that looks like. And so that was one of the things I think that was a draw for me or for them to me. And then the other piece of that was, it was interesting that I started and then like maybe 60 days later, the CEO was like, I'm retiring. So he had been there for 33 years. And so we got new leadership who came in, and she was about and is about how can we use asset-based community development throughout the foundation. So not only with grants and having people to look at, having organizations look at the gifts that they're using, but how can we use that in the other departments that are within the foundation? So how can we begin to look at the gifts and assets of organizations and churches that we provide loans to, or organizations and churches that we help with planned giving? And how can we help them look at a cycle of generosity, which helps us build into what we are using as how we are interpreting asset-based community development is through a cycle of generosity where you're not only just giving, but you're learning and you're investing and you're taking that time and you're listening. And so we use that cycle as part of our ABCD, asset-based community development. And so how we use that throughout the entire foundation. So it kind of fit at the right time, at the right place to be able to use that. So, yeah.
So what you're describing to me, and I'm by no means not an expert, but the place we're in now, well, some organizations are in now looking at donor-based philanthropy versus community-based philanthropy. I think what I was hearing you describe is more focused on maybe community-based philanthropy.
Yeah, it is. And we are kind of feeling our way through how that works because historically many foundations are very transactional, and we are really wanting to be relational. We are really wanting to see where we can improve what it is that we're doing and how we can help. And when I say help, it's because there are many organizations that have no idea about planned giving. They don't know. They don't know that they can create an endowment. Lots know about grants, but the longevity and the sustainability. How can we help you sustain your organization 20, 30 years from now? And that it's an and a proposition. You're not raising money against yourself. You're raising money with yourself. You're raising money with your future self, right? And so how can we as a foundation walk beside you in this process? We even walk beside organizations that we grant, right? Walk beside you in this process because we can't fund you forever, but we want to see you sustain and be alive forever. And so how can we help you get to that next point? So that's part of our desire in looking to see how can we make that happen.
I have several questions relating specifically to grant writing and fundraising, but I don't want to go there quite yet because you're taking us down a pretty interesting path. No, you really are. So more broadly speaking, and not just so much the Texas Methodist Foundation, but I'm assuming you're a part of Southwest Philanthropy and you interact with these other foundations, funders, people. So where is that group along this path that you've just been describing that Texas Methodist Foundation is trying to forge?
So I think everybody's at a different spot in their journey. I think most funders recognize that there are things that we can do better. I think most funders recognize that there are opportunities that we have with those that we provide grants for to help them along the way. I think a lot of funders are looking at ways to be more relational than to be transactional. I think the struggle or the opportunity comes in how that foundation is set up. How can they determine the capacity of what it is that they're trying to do? So anytime that you change things, it changes everything in the dynamic, and it also changes, like, do I have the capacity to walk beside people? Do I have the capacity to do some things as simple as an information session on how to fill out our application and to be able to help people, right? I call that giving the answers to the open book test, right? Do we have the capacity to do that? Do I have the capacity? Many foundations have, program officers that can be a liaison between the grantee and the foundation itself, but not every foundation, not many, some family foundations don't have that. Some of the larger ones don't have that. And so how do grantees build relationships with those funders to see what it is that they want? I mean, I remember when I was writing grants, and it would be like, okay, so who do I need to call? Who do I need to talk to? Is there anyone to talk to? Who's the most important person that I need to get to? And it might not be the president of grants, it might be their admin who has become a point person and a front person. But how do other organizations learn that that's something that you have to do, that grant writing is more than that? And then how do foundations provide that opportunity for them to find that person that can help them? We're thinking about this idea. Do you fund this? And so I think that every foundation is kind of going through that struggle of how do we improve our process to make it more relational than transactional.
Do you think part of this drive to self-assess, I guess, is generational? Leadership is changing, maybe?
I think that leadership is changing in both grant making and in grant writing. I've seen some articles where grant writers and organizations are asking foundations to have easier applications or to not ask for this or to make, life easier. And I think some of that may be true. I think that some of that is, I think there's a perception that as a grant maker, I have an unlimited pot of money that I answer to no one and I can just give it away.
Don't you?
Yeah, I wish. I thought that when I first took the job, and I was like, oh, I can't just give away everything, that there are people that I answer to that have invested, or in our case, in a lot of cases of community foundations, they're endowments that have planned people of, named beneficiaries of where dollars can go and all of that kind of stuff. And we like to call it the Tetris game. So we're matching to go into what fit. And so I think, again, part of educating grant writers is, it's not necessarily that we just have these giant pots of money and we're asking you to hop through hoops because we have nothing better to do. Sometimes we're asking you to hop through a hoop because there might be some strings attached to the dollars that we might be able to give you. And we're trying to see if that's a fit. And so it's not that we are just asking these questions just for whatever. It's not. Many of us have hoops that we have to go through. And so I think that sometimes there's a disconnect with grant writers and grant makers. And I think that who's responsible for bridging that gap? Some funders can have the capacity to do that. Some don't.
I want to shift our conversation a little bit because I wanted to make sure we get this segment in, and that is to talk about you. We kind of jumped right into it, and I wanted to get some more information on you for our listeners. The question that I'm always curious about is, why people get into fundraising, how they did it, and when they did it. Of course, we know you've been in fundraising for 15, maybe closer to 20 years now, maybe. But so what is the how and why?
How did I get here? So
Way back.
Way back, actually, and kind of by accident. So I was working with an organization in Chicago as a case manager. And this organization had decided that they were going to create a mentor program with the C-level executives. And they were opening it up to entry-level frontline workers to be able to have a mentor that was a C-level. And so I said I wanted to do that. But I also said that everybody's going to want to be with the CEO. So let me pick the CFO. As a person who hated counting money and never did accounting or anything like that. So I said, well, let me pick the CFO, because at least it would be somewhere up in the C-suite and I would have an idea of what that was. And so I picked the CFO, and I think I must have been the only person that selected the CFO. And so the CFO became my mentor for a year. And they had the commitment of meeting with us at least 4 times a year. And so we would go to lunch, and he would talk to me about nonprofit finance and what that looked like. And he had suggested that I take a certification for nonprofit management through DePaul University. And he talked about like what makes a good, healthy nonprofit budget. And like it's not all grants. It's not all that, right? You only want, and that's just a rule that I tell people all the time, 25% in grants. And that is a healthy budget. The rest of that, you have to figure out, how to do that. And that's because, and I didn't realize that you don't always get the grant. Like you get it the one time, but it doesn't mean that you're going to get it every year, which means also, he taught me about the rule of thirds, right? So however many grants you're writing, how many ever money you need, you write grants, 2/3 of more, 3/3 more than that so that you can get a third of that. And so you're always putting things out and you're always doing research and you're always looking. So he taught me fundraising kind of backdoor from a CFO perspective. That's how I got interested in fundraising and in grant writing. And then my sister-in-law wrote a grant for an aunt that we had because she had a daycare. And I was like, wow, you wrote a grant? She was like, yeah, it's all about just following the directions. It's like anybody can write a grant. You just follow the directions. I just followed the directions and they gave me the money. I was like, for real? So with the follow the direction mantra and the kind of an understanding on the background of nonprofit finance, that's my path into nonprofit work and fundraising and grant writing and that, yeah.
So where did you go after your mentorship was over?
Back to being a case manager, but a case manager that had much more knowledge. And so when I moved from Chicago to Dallas, I actually worked for a housing authority and did some housing authority work. And that work taught me about regulations and the difference between shall and must, right? There are regs that you shall, there are regs that you must, and there's a difference between the two. Shall gives you wiggle room, must does not give you wiggle room. Which has helped me now when I'm reading endowment papers, like it must go here or it can and shall, so what the difference is with that. And then from working at a housing authority, eventually down the road led me to Salvation Army. And it was really interesting because Salvation Army really was my first grant writing position. I had done some dabbling in grant writing for programs that I was managing, but to actually, that's like your job is to write grants and to bring in X amount of millions of dollars. It's like, oh, kind of scary. But I remember what my sister-in-law said, follow direction.
The Salvation Army experience is one that I refer to frequently when I deal with my clients or make presentations. It was a great learning experience. It wasn't always the best work environment. It was a great experience.
Yeah.
And it's one that has really, helped me, throughout my career, and also gave me some really long-lasting friendships too. So I never thought I would say that, but the Salvation Army, was a good stepping stone for me.
Yeah, it was a good space to kind of learn how to really do grants in a systematic way. And so creating the grants calendar and making sure and being able to talk to and learning how to I know this sounds crazy, but stalking, there's a good amount of stalking and grant writing where you're kind of looking to see, I learned how to really read a 990 and how to then kind of look up, okay, what have they funded in the past? And then, okay, then what does this look like? Is it worth it for us to even apply if this is what it is that they're looking for? And so it was a great learning experience for that. And then when I moved over to City Square, I was able to take all of that stuff and hone it into the experiences that I'm able to use now.
It's great. It's great when you can learn something at each position and take it on to the next one and keep refining it and honing it. That's a really good, not just work experience, but career path. So you touched on it a while ago, and this is something, when you said that, I thought, yes, because one of the things I always tell people, looking at grants, whether they're, clients or whatever, is to read and follow the directions. If you take nothing from what I tell you, is read and follow the directions. So what is the one thing that you wish all grant writers would do or not do? And it can't be read and follow directions because we've already said that.
We've already said that. Research. I wish that more grant writers would do research in where they're applying. Most funders will have their information now on their website, right? If they don't have it on their website, you can get a lot from a 990, who they've given to before, the size of gift that you should ask for. What is it that their mission and goal is, right? What are the things that they are planning and wanting to do? A lot of people think that funders are just, fairy godmothers that have money to be able to give, but they have goals and measurements, and they have people to answer to on who and what it is that they're giving to and who they're partnering with. And so I just wish that grant writers, it's amazing. Like, we have written several times, I think, on our site, like, we do not fund capital campaigns or construction. And how many inquiries and applications that I get that want us to do capital campaigns and construction? Like, we don't, do your research, look at 990, see what that is. The example that I give now is Bissell. So Bissell vacuum cleaners. If you look at the end of the Bissell commercial, every Bissell commercial, it talks about their foundation is for pets. It's pets. So if you're going to apply it for Bissell, it has to be pet related. If it's not pet related, then why are you applying at Bissell? Just because Bissell has a foundation doesn't mean that you're the good fit for that. So other than follow directions, do your research.
We mentioned Philanthropy Southwest a while ago, and this is a group of peer foundation people. And what does this group as a group look at or look for in a grant proposal? Or is that even a question?
Well, because again, it depends on each foundation and what it is that they do. So, for example, 2 years ago at our gathering, Luke Walton from the Bentonville Waltons, not the Walton Mountain Waltons, was there. And he talked about his foundation is about the environment. That's what he cares about. Other family members have foundations that are about different things. And so when we look at, and especially those foundations that are family foundations, and you look at we're getting ready to be in the middle of one of the largest transfers of wealth that the country has ever seen. And so what does that mean for some of these foundations? It may mean a change in their funding priorities because there's a change in leadership. So it might change that. So I think that South by Southwest is also going through this, not South by Southwest,
Southwest, philanthropy.
Yeah, philanthropy is also kind of going through what is impactful, what are funders looking for as far as their processes or looking at new voices to be able to fund. What does that mean as, we're looking at this transition of wealth and we're moving to younger generations who they're not as tied to what generations previously have found important. their ROI is different. It's about what they're passionate about and not necessarily what they feel like they're being obligated to give to. And one of the things that he talked about, and it's very true, is that older generations give to institutions because they're institutions. Younger generations don't trust institutions. So how are funders, how are foundations moving as there's this shift in demographics? There's this shift in age of who is in charge of fundraising and the funding and the grant making in foundations. And so I think it's an exciting time because it's a time where grant makers are able to kind of do a reassessment and a reevaluation of what their priorities are. And then the opportunity to be able to share that with grant makers. So I think it's an interesting stage of where funders are right now. And so what they're looking for varies, but the one thing that they're looking for is organizations that align with what it is that they're passionate about. And that goes back to grant writers doing the research.
One of the things aligned with this research suggestion is just because I don't think everything changes this frequently, but every year you should just go back and see, okay, ABC Foundation funded us last year. Of course, they'll fund us again this year. But maybe in that 12-month period, they've changed their focus. Mm-hmm. And you need to know that and not just assume. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, that's part of the research. I mean,
mm-hmm. But it's like every year.
Every year you need to look at that. Every year you need to, I think as a grant writer, having a calendar is very helpful, not only in who to apply to when, because everybody has a deadline, and even a revolving one has a deadline. But also, when I was writing grants, I spent the month of December doing one, updating my template, right? Because maybe things have changed within the organization that I'm writing for, so that language doesn't work anymore, so I need to change that. But then to go through and say, okay, of those funders that we have historically gotten a lot, right, consistently, have they had any changes? Have they had personnel changes? Have they had changes in their funding priority? Have they made some rule changes? So now that, we've gotten funding for 3 years, they want us to sit out for 2, right? So I would spend December, because nobody's really awarding grants in December. It's December. Where's Christmas? It's December. So I was able to spend that time doing research, doing updates, following contacts, sending out holiday cards and seeing which mailing address came back that wasn't there anymore. That person wasn't there anymore. So all of that, helps with your calendar of being able to do that type of work so that you're ready to start the new year hitting the road.
Is it helpful for the board members of an organization to advocate for their organization with you or with your board members?
Yes, for advocating with me, but in this way. I love going to a site visit that board members have taken time out to come to. It shows me that they are interested really in the organization and in the working of the organization, and then to be able to see who and what they're getting funds from and for. And I know that every board member can't do that, but every time that I go to do a site visit and somebody says, and this is our board member, I'm thrilled because that shows me as a funder that it's more than just being a board member by name. You actually are caring more than just attending a board meeting, that you actually are caring about this. And when they share why they're passionate about this organization and why they take time to come and do this, I love it because then I get the energy and then I can feel that. And I see executive directors and development officers all the time, but I like seeing board members even more than I like seeing the people who were provided services, because they are truly And they understand that it's, fundraising is it's part of the process. And so, yes, having board members be advocates in a way of site visiting or even in funder nurturing in relations can work as well. And I've had board members, TMF board members, attend site visits when we're doing site visits for our grant cycle. And so I've invited them. I'll tell them, here's where I'm going, here's the list, here's the times. And I've had board members who have gone on site visits because it gives them an idea of what it is that we're funding. It gives them the idea of who it is that we're partnering with. So I always leave that open for board members and other staff persons at TMF to attend site visits. Yeah.
One of the things that I run across, and I know this isn't unique to me, but working with a client and it's like, oh, well, Joe Bob on our board is friends with Mary Sue on the foundation. I'm going to have him give her a call. It's like, are they really friends? Like really, really, okay, that is different from they met somewhere and he feels like he can give her a call. I just feel like that's kind of a line being stepped over. But is that just me?
No, I think it depends on how aggressive that board member is in trying to show their passion for their organization. A lot of times, and I share with our board, thank you for that information, and go back and have them to look at our website, see if we're a match. If they think that we're a match, we've got some dates on there that they can do. And to get them into the process, have them begin to apply, which is what I tell our board members. And so it takes the pressure off of the board member, because sometimes I think that puts undue pressure on the board member. Like, okay, I have to tell you, Wendy, about this organization. I'm like, okay, thank you for sharing, and I appreciate that. So let me help take the pressure off of you. Have them go back and look at who we funded in the past, look at what our deadlines are, look at what all that is on the webpage. So have them go back and look at that. And then if they think that they're a match, they can begin that process. And so I think that takes some of the pressure off of a board member, because I don't want a board member to be pressured into something. So yeah, that's how I handle it.
So I know at some point, if an organization applies over and over again, at some point they should know that, okay, even though it looks like we're a match, we're really not a match. So when should an organization stop applying, or how should they try to get more information about why they're not getting funded?
Good question. And I've got several answers. So one is a no today and not forever. We've talked about priorities change, staff changes, personnel changes. A no is a no for today. It might be that I don't have any money that falls in your bucket. A lot of community foundations, it's endowment, so I don't have anything in the endowment that falls in that bucket. But so a no is a no today. A no is not a no forever. So keep trying. So that's one thing. But another thing is, if the funder is offering you opportunities, if they give you a application information session to attend, like we do application information sessions, so attend that application information. So attend it. It's, again, giving you the answers to an open book test. They're telling you exactly what it is that they want, nothing more, nothing less. Again, that's following the directions. But the second thing is if you feel like you're a really good match, reach out. Send an email, reach out. I do a couple of things because, again, I've been a grant writer, so I know what it's like to write an application. It goes into the deep abyss and you never hear from anybody ever again because it's capacity. Don't have the capacity to do that. Texas Methodist Foundation, what we do, again, because of my experience, we have a webinar, or we do a Zoom call session for those persons that didn't get partnered with us through funding, to say, this is what we found, not one-on-one, but in general. Normally it's in general. There are things that people do that are generally they mess up the same way, right? It's the same thing that they're not following the same direction. And so we do a session where we say, look, these are the things that we saw I was wrong. Take your application, listen to what I'm saying. Does that match up? And so we have a session, actually, I think it's coming up next week for our last cycle, that we allow that opportunity. And then for some organizations, and I'm just crazy enough to think that this will work, is for some organizations that we have funded before but did not fund this time. If I have the time, I will meet with them for 30 minutes, one-on-one. Sometimes it's nothing that you did. It's the stronger applications that are there. Sometimes you have a relationship with me, but I'm not the one reading your application. So I know what you're doing because we've had that relationship. But if your application is read by somebody else who doesn't know, it may look, and that is because they still have questions, which is one of the things, and I probably should have said this earlier, but one of the things that I tell grantees, and one of the things that's in our application information session, other than follow the directions, is have somebody outside of your organization read that application before you hit submit. If they have questions because they don't know you, I'm going to have questions. Or whoever reads your application is going to have questions. And so have somebody else read it. Those organizations that normally do those two things, follow the directions and have somebody else read their application before submitted, have very strong applications because the person who's reading it has no questions because they've answered all the questions that a stranger would have on their application. And you have to consider that a stranger is reading your application. In our instance, this past year, we had other TMF staff persons read applications because I didn't have the capacity to read them all myself.
That is a really good tip. I have used that for like appeal letters or newsletters, but I never really thought about that for grants. That's a really good tip.
Yeah.
Well, and this is probably asking, a question that you've already answered, but I'll ask it again. Mm-hmm. How can organizations better prepare to submit an outstanding grant application?
So again, like following the directions, as we said, which was something I was thinking about when I was like, what if I could follow the directions? Do the research. Make sure that somebody else is reading over it. Make sure that you really align with, in part of that research, that you align with the priorities of where it is that you are applying. And within following directions, if you're given 3,000 characters and you only use 250, you are leaving money on the table. I'm not saying that you have to use all 3,000, but you've got to use more than 250. I know that you think that you have answered it in 250, but if the funder has given you more characters, use as many as you can that makes sense for you to use, but don't just, because it's like, okay, I have more questions with 250 characters than I do with 2,000. And so tell your story in the best way that you can. Oh, and I'm trying to say a nice way to say this. Don't ramble. If you're done just because they've given you 3,000 and you've used 2,000, then don't ramble on that last 1,000. Just put a period in it and let it be done. So do that. If you're able to give or upload additional information in what they want, make that meaningful. You don't have to send us your 55-page annual report because I'm not going to read it. It's just I don't have the capacity to read it. But if there's like a one-page collateral or a couple, or, a newsletter or something like that to be able to give a better understanding, or a link to a short video, it's even better, then go ahead and do that. But don't just,
don't ramble.
And another thing that has nothing to do with the application, but speaking for me, I personally don't need to be added to your mailing list. I don't know how I get on them sometimes. I guess I do, but I don't. But I don't need to be on your mailing list. Even if I granted you dollars, I don't need to be on your mailing list for every campaign that you've got coming out. as a fundraising campaign, because especially if I've granted you, I've already fundraised for you. I've already done it. So I don't need to be constantly on there. Like, we give an option, like, do you want to hear from us or do you not want to hear from us? Yes or no. If you don't, we don't mail you anything. If you do, okay, fine. I would like to say my answer is no. I don't want to. It clogs up my emails.
If someone said to you, I want to be a grant writer for a nonprofit, what advice would you give them?
Don't take it personal when you get a no. It is not personal. Rejection comes. Sometimes they tell you. Sometimes they don't tell you. Rejection it comes, and you can't take it personal. It's not how you've written things sometimes. Sometimes it depends on who's reading it. Sometimes that day they don't like what you do. Sometimes that day you used a phrase that just triggered the reader. It has nothing to do with the program that you're doing, or it has nothing to do, it's everything. Grant writing is very subjective. And so, one, you cannot take it personal. And then two, celebrate. Because you were in competition with a bunch of people trying to get however much you got, whatever you were awarded. There were a lot of other people that wanted that and didn't get it. So celebrate, even if nobody else celebrate yourself when you get that. And the third thing is check your mailbox. So here's the funny story. When I was working at City Square and I was a grant writer and I had a mailbox, and I never got any mail because a grant writer doesn't get mail, right? You're just a grant writer. You don't get mail. And so the guy who did the mail run would give me mail so that my mailbox wouldn't be empty. And so he gave me stuff like catalogs for mops and T-shirts and, envelopes that said like to the current resident of, right? So I got all that stuff, which led me to not checking my mailbox on a regular basis. Like, it'd be weeks and I would not look at it because I knew there was nothing in there. So one day I went to go clean out the mailbox because I knew that there was no mail in there for me. And I said, well, let me just look through it. And there was a letter from Walmart. Because I had done a Walmart application as a last minute. It's like, due in 2 days, let's just write this grant for, I think it was like $150,000. And let's just write this grant for Walmart, and do that. And I did it and did it off and called it a day. So I was like, oh, it's a rejection letter. Let me see how they rejected me. And I opened it, and it was a check for $150,000. And how long it had been sitting in my mailbox, I have no clue. And I was like, oh, I guess we need to turn this in, because who sends the check to the grant writer? I had the director of development on. So anyway, check your mailbox if you're the grant writer. Just make sure that you do that, because it might be a check in there for $150,000 that you don't know how long. It may have been a couple of weeks, maybe, that it said it, because
That's a great story.
Yeah.
That's a really good story.
Yeah.
So a couple of questions to wrap up here.
Uh-huh.
One is, what is the worst thing an organization can do when submitting a grant proposal to you or any other foundation funder? What's the worst thing?
Not follow directions. I know that sounds like a broken record, but it is so true. For example, we have last year in our application session, when people always want to know, like, how much, what's the maximum that you're going to ask for? And we said, this year, let's cap your ask at 50. So I had 3 applications for at least $2.2 million. So either you didn't go to the application information session, you didn't look, because we put the session on our page. We recorded it, put it there, because we want you to have the answers to the open book test. And so when you don't follow the directions, sometimes people will. So when there's a technical difficulty, yes, let us know that there's technical difficulty. But if there's no technical difficulty and you're just calling to see that we get your application, you got the confirmation email from our system. Now, if you're saying that you didn't get an email, because we tell you you'll get an email when you hit this, you should get an email from us that says you got it, we got it, and we look forward to reading it. But if you're saying, yeah, I got the email, but just want to know if you got it, it's a busy time of the year when people are doing, when it's a cycle that you're doing. And so having that is difficult. And then applying for something that just really doesn't align with the priorities of an organization or a funder is just not good. And then here's something just to think about. Not every funder is for you. Sometimes it doesn't align with what it is that you do. Sometimes what they're requiring you to do is something you don't do. So, for example, if you are applying for a grant and one of their metrics is to count the number of curly head, red head, left, green-eyed, skip to school in saddle Oxfords, left-handed people, and you don't collect that data, applying for that is just a headache for you waiting to happen. And so every foundation, every funding opportunity may not be for you. And even when funders offer you, like every now and then they'll go like, oh, we love you so much, here's X, Y, and Z dollars. Do your research. Because accepting checks with the strings that go with it might not be for you. So really take a look at who you are when you begin to look and research of who you want to partner with.
So my last question is one I like to ask every guest. We've covered so much already, so you may be answering it again. Mm-hmm. But what is the one thing you want listeners to take away from our conversation today? The one thing you want someone to remember after having listened to our conversation?
Other than follow the directions.
Maybe it's follow the directions.
Other than follow the directions, I would say that in grant writing, no is for today. No is for today. No is not for forever. And if you can remember that, it's not personal. No may be for today. I think that helps people and it helps organizations because many, especially smaller ones, get so discouraged because they didn't get. Don't be discouraged. Keep working on your organization. Keep working on you. And no is for today. It's not for forever.
Thank you, Wendy Abel. I'm so glad that we've had this time to have this conversation today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's a joy and a pleasure.
Thank you so much. This is Diana Marquis, the founder and chief strategist of DM Group Consulting and the host of About Fundraising, the podcast. And again, I want to thank my guest, Wendy Abel, for joining us today to talk about all things foundations and grant writing. Thanks so much.
Thank you.